From South Carolina Public Radio, this is the South Carolina Lede. I'm your host, Gavin Jackson, and this episode was recorded on July 1st, 2026 at South Carolina Public Radio Studios here in Columbia. Happy July!
Thank you.
And if you're listening when this podcast drops on July 4th, happy birthday, America. 250.
Oh, wow, man.
Here's to another 250 as we continue to strive to become a more perfect union, kicking and screaming all the way. Yes, we are. On this episode of The Lede, we bring you my This Week in South Carolina segment, looking at America's 250th birthday, and it's more of a reflection here in South Carolina. In fact, it's so reflective that we're not winding down. I know, I'm sorry, there's not going to be a couple wind downs for a while. But I want to take you with me as we visit a key battlefield in our state. We talk with veterans excavating another, and we also hear from Pulitzer Prize winning author and historian Jon Meacham. There's a lot in this episode. In fact, I'm going to give you more Meacham because there's so much Meacham. We're going to have two parts for you in the future, so stay tuned for that. Just a little teaser there because he's good. But throughout the year, there have been dozens of events across South Carolina, probably hundreds. And South Carolina was a colony that played a pivotal role in winning the Revolutionary War against the British, thanks in part to the over 200 battles and skirmishes fought here, including one of the first decisive victories at the Battle of Sullivan's Island on June 28, 1776, a day we commemorate as Carolina Day now. In fact, all those battles and skirmishes, that's why it says where the Revolutionary War was won on our license plates, folks. In 1780, though, as the war raged on, several defining battles and patriot losses took place in South Carolina, including the Siege of Charleston and the Battle of Camden. But the tide began changing later that year, with the victory at the Battle of Kings Mountain in October 1780, and then the early January 1781 Battle of Cowpens that crippled the British and helped lead to their surrender later that year at Yorktown. I was there this past January as the National Battlefield celebrated its 245th anniversary with fanfare, reenactors, a fife and drum band, as well as weapons and cavalry demonstrations at the battlefield in Spartanburg County, and what is still studied as a masterpiece in military tactics, as American General Daniel Morgan and his militia successfully executed a double envelopment and decimated British Lieutenant Colonel Banastre Tarleton's elite forces. Several reenactors, including Stephen McKee, walk us through this critical period in time.
Really, if you look at the Southern campaign, the war absolutely started in the North, but the war was 100% won and independence secured here in the Southern Department, and the Battle of Cowpens really played a huge role in making that happen. But there's lots of letters pouring out of North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia back to England basically saying, hey, there's a lot of loyalists in the South, and if you would just send an army down here and raise the King's standard, then all these loyalists are going to flock to the King's standard, and we can put down the rebellion in the South, restore the Carolinas and Georgia to royal control, and then you can march north and finish off Washington. So that's really the Southern strategy comes about from those letters and really from discussions of, hey, we're not really winning in the North, let's see if we can conquer the South and then finish this thing. So in 1779, the British attack and capture Savannah, Georgia, and later Augusta, Georgia. And in 1779, they even marched inland through South Carolina, winning string after string of victories. And right outside of Charlestown, or Charleston today. But ultimately, they don't capture it. They march back to Georgia until 1780. Then they come back and they capture Charleston after the Second Battle of Charleston, and they begin marching inland where they in a series of successful victories, basically just pushing patriots out of I guess, rebel-held territory. They capture Camden, 96, all of that stuff. At that time, the American Army, after the surrender of Charleston, largest American defeat of the war, roughly 5,500 to 6,000 rebels are captured at that point, and there's not really an army in the South to speak of anymore. They're going to check the British advance, which is why they're so successful marching out of Charleston. The idea now is, hey, these pitched battles that we're trying to fight with the British, it's not really working out for us too well here in the South. So what we'll do is we'll have a highly mobile army that can move and strike and take things and then move before it can be defeated. And so you get this situation where you get two dynamic commanders in Daniel Morgan and Banastre Tarleton, that are going to meet here at the Cowpens. But prior to that, in October of 1780, you get the Battle of Kings Mountain, and then you also get the Battle of Shallow Ford. But Kings Mountain happens, and it's mostly Americans versus Americans, and it defeats Cornwallis's left flank, and it prevents Cornwallis from moving into North Carolina quite as early as he wanted to, so he retreats from Charlotte at that point back to Winnsboro in South Carolina. And so the winter campaign is now just going to be in winter garrison essentially in South Carolina, and they're going to reinvade North Carolina in the spring. So it kind of stops the British advance. A week after the Battle of Kings Mountain is the Battle of Shallow Ford. And Shallow Ford, 900 loyalists from North Carolina were coming to reinforce Cornwallis's army, and they're stopped at the Shallow Ford. They're ambushed there at the ford on the Yadkin River in North Carolina, soundly defeated, and really between the Battle of Ramser's Mill that took place in June 1780, the Battle of Kings Mountain that took place in October, and Shallow Ford really kind of crushes any type of loyalist uprising that could occur in North Carolina, which combined with the withering effects of fighting here in South Carolina is going to remove Cornwallis's ability really to wage offensive war. So when South Carolina says that the Revolutionary War was won in South Carolina, I would argue it was won in the Carolinas, but South Carolina certainly has a strong claim to that given as much fighting that did occur here in the state. It was more battles here than any other state of the 13. So you get to that point, and then in January of 1781, as I mentioned, you got two very dynamic characters as commanders. You've got Daniel Morgan. He's been an Indian fighter. He fought in the French and Indian War. He's kind of a, I'm not going to call him an insolent person, but he's certainly a very do-it-his-own-way kind of guy. He had been whipped mercilessly by the British when he was in the British service for striking a British officer during the French and Indian War. So he held a grudge against British forces that after the war, he said he gave them some of those lashes back here at the Battle of Cowpens. But Banastre Tarleton, the British commander, was a very brash, very bold, confident commander, and if he caught you in the field, he was going to attack. That's what he was going to do. And Daniel Morgan understood that, he knew that, and so when Tarleton gets here at the Cowpens and he catches Daniel Morgan's army, Daniel Morgan decides he's going to use that brashness against Tarleton to try and lure him into a trap. So what happens is Daniel Morgan sets up three lines. You've got his riflemen in the first line, you've got militia in the second line, and then in reserves just behind a rise where Tarleton couldn't see them, he had a company of Continentals standing in reserve, and the idea was, hey, as Tarleton charges into us, I need one or two good shots from the riflemen. And pick your marks, hit your marks, and then after one or two good shots, you can then retreat and leave the battlefield. Because again, the militia in the South had not been fighting as much as the militia in the North. They were really green troops, didn't have a lot of experience, and quite frankly, facing a cavalry charge is a terrifying thing to go through.
Here's reenactor Mark Kirkman with the Mecklenburg Militia.
As a reenactor, it's fun. It is literally like a time machine.
It had to be done.
Back then, it would have been terrifying because the people beside you might be getting hit and falling, and you were trained. If the guy in front of you, a lot of times they fired in two ranks, you'd step over them. It is smoky. These things produce a big cloud of smoke. And especially down south, not so much in January, but in the summer, if it's humid, that smoke just kind of hangs. They're loud, but they're not as loud as, say, modern guns. The bullets, the rounds don't go supersonic, so it's like thunder. It's not like a sharp crack.
So he gets those first good shots out of the riflemen, who then retreat to the second line, and then there's a miscommunication. So the second line, the militia sees the riflemen coming, and they think that they're fleeing, so the second line starts to break as well. So it's looking like the Battle of Cowpens is going to be a disaster, but unlike Camden, the commanders managed to get hold of the militia, stop their flight, and as the British charge it, they halt the militia, they have them do an about face, and they fire practically point blank into the charging British, and it absolutely crushes the British advance here on the field. Field artillery pieces, especially in the time period, they're mostly anti-personnel in nature, right? So each one of them is sized. When I say a light 3-pound field artillery piece, it means the weight of the shot that artillery piece shoots is 3 pounds, whether it's a solid cannonball, whether it's grape shot, or any type of projectile that you would fire out of the cannon. So when you're watching movies, if you watch The Patriot and you see the cannons firing and you see the big explosion, that's not how it actually worked with field artillery pieces. And in the field, you would predominantly use grape shot, which were iron or steel balls that were basically turn the cannon into a giant shotgun with about 600 yards of range, because again, the whole purpose of the artillery was to thin out the ranks of the Army as the armies were marching towards each other, eliminate as many personnel as you can, to where once they're in musket range and they start firing at each other, you've weakened that army as much as humanly possible. At that point, the Continentals then spill in as reinforcements, and Colonel Washington, George Washington's cousin, who's in charge of the cavalry here, the American cavalry, spills onto the field, and basically the Americans surround the British Army and force the British Army to surrender. Now Tarleton, he does make a flight from the field, so he escapes with some of his officers, but the British Army itself is surrounded, and it's one of the few successful double envelopments that take place in all of warfare. It's such a consequential battle here at the Cowpens that even at West Point today, Army officers still study this battle for its tactical and strategic brilliance in basically capitalizing on the strengths of the American Army while absolutely capitalizing on the weaknesses of the British Army, which wasn't their experience, it wasn't their training, but it was the brashness of their commander and his willingness to fight that had basically allowed him to run roughshod through the Carolinas and Georgia. His name was feared because, again, if Tarleton was after you, Tarleton was going to get you. But here at the Cowpens, they managed to use that against him and defeat that army. And really, when you look at Kings Mountain, or you look at Ramser's Mill, Kings Mountain, Shallow Ford, Cowpens, it weakens the British Army in the South so much that by the time they get to Guilford Courthouse near Greensboro, North Carolina in March and lose 20-25% of their soldiers, the ability of Cornwallis to wage any type of offensive war or to capitalize on any of the gains that were made in 1779 or 1780 are now gone, which then leads Cornwallis down to Wilmington and then to the north onto the Yorktown Peninsula, where in October of 1781, the French Navy, in one of their rare stunning victories against the Royal Navy, defeats the Royal Navy that had been sent from New York to relieve Cornwallis. Washington and the French sweep down. They leave New York, leave a small group up there to keep Sir Henry Clinton convinced they're still encamped around New York, and they sweep down, they trap Cornwallis by land, and ultimately Cornwallis surrenders. And at that point, when word reaches London, Lord North basically says, "My God, it's over."
Jon Meacham is a Pulitzer Prize winning author, historian, and intellectual. His knowledge and interpretation of history provide needed factual insight as our country continues to strive to become a more perfect union 250 years into this revolutionary experiment. His latest book is American Struggle, Democracy, Dissent, and the Pursuit of a More Perfect Union, and he spoke at the Revolutionary Ideas Symposium at Charleston's Dock Street Theater in late June.
Is there anything else?
And I was also there.
Wow.
And he was also in conversation with Florence Lawyer and SC250 board member Ben Ziegler.
Only 3 times since the Second World War have 60% of us. So think about it. Look around. On your row, 4 of the people on your row we're going to say that you were wrong about who you voted for president. That's when we were most united. In 1964, in 1972, and in 1984. President Johnson, President Nixon, and President Reagan all got 59 to 61% of the vote. Every other election was infinitely closer. From 1932 to 2000, don't hold me to these exact numbers, but it's close. The average decisive number, the margin in a presidential election, 1932 to 2000, was 8.5%. Since 2000, it's less than 1%. President Biden would not have been President Biden if a home game at Yankee Stadium, 45,000 votes, had shifted in 2020. Vice President Harris would be President Harris if a home stand at Yankee Stadium, 200,000 votes, had changed. These are not vast margins. And that should be empowering. It does mean that all of us matter. It means that our habits of heart and mind matter. It means that what we have learned again and again in a government based on the will of the people is that the will and whims and character of those people matters. We have to put down the phones. You have to know that the algorithm is sending you what it thinks you want. You have to resist playing into the people who have monetized conflict. And it's hard. I'm not very good at it. When Musk bought Twitter, I got off Twitter. And then when Zuckerberg started doing what he did, I got off all his stuff too. I am much healthier mentally, which is a low bar for me. But I don't pay attention to minute. And I promise you, I'm fine. And it's hard. And it's but we have this, there's a machinery of perpetual conflict that thrives on producing momentary bursts of attention-getting anger. The story of when we have become a more perfect union has to be told because we're not doing it right now. So the story matters. And the kids born in the 21st century, let's think about it. It begins with September 11th, the failure of weapons of mass destruction intelligence, the Great Recession, a biographically interesting but historically indispositive Obama presidency, COVID, the rise of President Trump, the popular impression that the Supreme Court has never been more politicized. And I would argue, too, that one of the reasons there is so little trust in institutions among folks of the born in the 21st century is that we have told them when we run through school shooting drills, we have told them we can't keep you safe. We have admitted that. There are three places you're supposed to feel safe, right? Home, church, classroom. And we've said, we're not really sure we can do this, so this is what you do if someone walks in here with a gun. I don't think we've thought about how the impact that's had. But why would you trust the grown-ups who have to have you trained for that? It makes the story so important, right? It makes the fact that kids your age went to Omaha Beach. Kids your age went to Gettysburg. And the story matters.
And that was just 5 minutes of Meacham, guys.
Wow.
Spoiler, like I said, I'm bringing you his speech and his conversation with Ben in our subsequent 2 episodes. So he's very funny as he is smart. So stay tuned for that because I was literally busting up. And it takes a lot because I have very highbrow humor tastes. In fact, I just do lowbrow slapstick. Now, in March of this year, several veterans with American Veterans Archaeological Recovery excavated and surveyed parts of the Camden battlefield and colonial town site. Stephen Humphreys, CEO of the organization, and Stacy Ferguson with Historic Camden take us back in time to colonial Camden through their discoveries while also providing present-day lessons. Here's Stacy, who I also met at the Battle of Cowpens as she was dressed as a reenactor.
The big goal of that mission on the battlefield isn't just the cool stuff you get to dig out of the ground. More importantly, it's where it was found. So every time there's an artifact that's found, they're tracked by GPS. So they get a very exact coordinate where exactly it was found. So what this can tell us is when you look at that map and if you see really heavy concentration of all those dots, there was probably some heavy fighting in that area. The Battle of Camden happened on August 16th, 1780. For years, what we knew about it was simply from the accounts of those that were there. So we have commanders after action reports, and then also some common soldiers who were writing home and talking about the action, those kind of things. There were also a few maps that were drawn by, especially the British military. And so that was as much as we knew about it. We've spent a lot of time last year and this year looking at the area where we believe the militia, the American militia, was on the line. Now, the American militia at the Battle of Camden, en masse, they broke and ran pretty early in the action. So they came down here with little to no training, and their commanders put them out in front of, the toughest army in the world possibly, and expected them to stand up and fight, and that didn't happen so much, right? I don't know why they would think it would go any other way. And so that's what we've always known. The militia broke and ran, right? But now we're finding a lot of fired munitions, American and British munitions, in that area that says, yeah, there was fighting going on there. There were at least some people that were fighting back. So we're going to keep continuing to explore that, and it's going to just kind of give us an accurate picture with using that GPS data and the heat maps to say where it was the heaviest fighting. From an archaeological perspective, whether you're talking about the battlefield archaeology, it's its own field called conflict archaeology, or you're talking about just the material culture of the colonial and young city of Camden, we are in a really great location.
As a program, we have really tried to focus on connecting our veterans with the American Revolution. Because for us as service members, that's really what the country came from. That's the birth of the country as a whole. But that's really the birth of our own culture as well. That's where you have the first American service members. And we do consider ourselves to be, we inherited that legacy. I also think for us, we see past service members, those past individuals who wore the uniform, as family members. So we have a connection to those individuals that really goes beyond these kind of bigger picture questions. For us, it's all about those individual named service members who may have been lost to history and who may now only really exist in a scatter of artifacts or even one musket ball. So what we're doing is we're going and sending these current service members or veterans out to find those objects so that we can remember those individual soldiers. So what we're giving veterans is an opportunity to come and do meaningful work that gives them a renewed sense of purpose and compensates them and pays their bills, by the way. But they get to do that alongside people that become that found family for them over time. And that's a really rewarding thing for us to watch, and it's a really rewarding thing for us to watch as they learn to do really high quality science.
You can watch all of this and more at youtube.com/SCETV News. And that's it for us in this episode, but we will have a wind down soon. You got a call so you can bring the wind down back first, 803-563-7169. Can't wait to hear from you when I'm back from vacation. AT's not allowed to talk unless you're talking, so it's kind of like in Hook when they had to clap to bring Tinkerbell back to life. Okay, same thing. There you are, Peter. Okay. It all comes back to Hook on this episode. It's part of the maritime aspect, the undercurrent, if you will, of this entire podcast. But thanks for listening to the episode, guys. You can show us your appreciation by leaving us a review at Apple Podcasts, wherever your podcast from, or a voicemail at 803-563-7169. Get the wind down for us. You can stay up to date with the latest news on SCETV.org and SouthCarolinaPublicRadio.org, and don't forget to support your local newspapers. The South Carolina Lede is a production of South Carolina Public Radio. Our producer is A.T. Shire. Amy Crouch is our supervising producer. Sean Birch is our executive producer. Sydney Wilcox is our intern, along with Jake. This podcast is produced with support from PRX and is made possible in part by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, as well as listener contributions to the ETV Endowment of South Carolina. For the South Carolina Lede, I'm Gavin Jackson. Be well, South Carolina.
Yeah, of course they can't hear it. They're old. They're old and they smell. What? What?